The polished marble floor of the courtroom was cold, a stark contrast to the feverish heat of public anger. Reporters crowded the gallery, their cameras hungry for a spectacle. The charge was simple: assault. The man in the expensive navy suit, his posture one of irritated boredom, was Thomas Ellington, son of Senator Richard Ellington. And across from him, on the worn wooden bench reserved for those who had no one to speak for them, sat Leo. His hands, calloused and stained, trembled slightly in his lap. A faded beanie covered his head, and his jacket, though threadbare, was clean. He did not look at his accused. He stared at a crack in the floor tile, as if hoping it might open and swallow this entire, painful circus. The air buzzed with unspoken privilege. Thomas's lawyer, a shark in Armani, had already tried to get the case dismissed. A misunderstanding between citizens, he'd called it. An overzealous response from a young man who felt threatened. The security footage, however, told a different, silent story. It had been played at the start. Thomas, laughing with friends outside an upscale bistro, tossing a half-eaten burger into a nearby doorway. Leo had emerged from that doorway, not with anger, but with a quiet dignity, offering the wrapped food back, saying words the camera couldn't catch. Thomas's face had twisted from amusement to contempt. The shove was violent, gratuitous. Leo had fallen hard against a brick wall, the sound a sickening thud, even on the muted video. Thomas had then taken out his wallet, peeled off a few bills, and tossed them at Leo's feet before walking away. That moment, the casual violence followed by the monetary dismissal, had lit the fuse of a national outrage. But this wasn't a normal courtroom. Presiding was Chief Magistrate Frank Caprio, a man whose reputation was not of harshness, but of a profound, unsettling humanity. He watched Thomas now, his eyes not judging, but deeply measuring. He saw the young man, not as a monster, but as a symptom, a product of a world where consequence was a foreign concept, where money was both shield and sword. The case seemed straightforward. The evidence was damning. A fine, maybe some community service, probation. The system would turn its slow, predictable gears. Yet there was a secret in the room. Unknown to Thomas, to the press, to the public watching the live stream, Judge Caprio had not come to this case unprepared. He had done what he always did. He looked beyond the docket number. He had spent the night before not just reviewing files, but walking the streets where Leo slept. He had spoken to the shelter volunteers who knew Leo as a man who shared his meager food, who read library books to the kids at the community center, a man who had lost his job, then his apartment, after caring for a sick mother until her last breath. He was not a homeless man. He was Leo. And Thomas was not just a senator's son. He was a young man so utterly lost in the fortress of his own privilege that he could no longer see the humanity in another human being. The hearing proceeded. Thomas's lawyer presented his defense: stress, the pressures of his father's public life, the unsettling and unpredictable nature of the encounter. He painted Leo as an unstable variable. Then he called Thomas to the stand. Thomas straightened his tie, a smirk playing on his lips. This was a performance for his friends, for his father's political opponents. He was playing a part, the besieged aristocrat. "Mr. Ellington," his lawyer began, "can you describe your state of mind that evening?" "Honestly, a bit startled," Thomas said, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "He came out of the shadows very aggressively. I acted on instinct to protect myself and my friends." From his bench, Leo closed his eyes. A single, slow breath escaped him. It was the breath of a man tired of being rewritten, of being cast as a villain in someone else's story. "Show." Caprio leaned forward. "Your instinct," he said, his voice deceptively soft, "was to shove him, then throw money at him." Thomas shifted, the first flicker of unease crossing his face. It wasn't like that. I offered financial compensation for any inconvenience. It was a gesture of goodwill. A gesture of goodwill, Caprio repeated, letting the phrase hang in the heavy air. He picked up a single sheet of paper. The medical report for Mr. Leo indicates a bruised rib and a concussion. Your goodwill left him unable to access the shelter that night because he was in the ER. He slept in the doorway of that very bistro. Thomas shrugged, a small dismissive gesture. Again, I'm sorry if he misinterpreted my actions. I'm willing to pay any reasonable medical bills. The arrogance was breathtaking. It wasn't an apology. It was a transaction. The gallery murmured. Caprio let the silence stretch, a tense, elastic thing about to snap. And what of his dignity, Mr. Ellington? Caprio asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow filled the room. What is the price for that? Can you put a number on it? Can you write a check that restores a man's sense of safety? His right to exist in a public space without being assaulted for the crime of being poor. Thomas blinked, thrown. This wasn't in the script. Lawyers argued about laws, fines, sentencing guidelines. They didn't talk about dignity. I don't know what you want me to say, he stammered, his confidence cracking. I want you to understand, Caprio said, his gaze locking onto Thomas's. I want you to see him. He gestured to Leo. Not a problem, not a statistic, a man. Look at him. Reluctantly, Thomas turned his head. For the first time, he truly looked at Leo, not as an abstract concept of the homeless, but at the lines of hardship and resilience on his face, at the quiet strength in his posture, even in defeat. For a fleeting second, something wavered in Thomas's eyes. Not remorse, not yet, but confusion. The cognitive dissonance of a carefully constructed worldview meeting an undeniable reality. Caprio saw it, the crack in the armor. This was the moment, not for a standard sentence, for something that could either break this young man utterly or remake him. But before I tell you what Judge Caprio does next, the narrator's voice would later say, a suspenseful pause hanging over the footage. Comment below. What would you do? How do you teach empathy to someone who's never had to learn it? Caprio sat back, steepling his fingers. The usual sentence for this offense is a fine and probation. It is a punishment that, for someone in your position, is merely a cost of doing business. You would pay it, forget it, and learn nothing. The wound you inflicted on Mr. Leo would heal, but the sickness in your own character would remain, festering. He paused, letting the severity of his words sink in, not just for Thomas, but for the world watching. So I am not going to give you the usual sentence. Justice is not one size fits all. True justice is transformative. It must fit the crime and the criminal and the harmed. He looked directly at the camera, then back to Thomas, whose face had gone pale. Thomas Ellington, for the crime of assault, and for the deeper crime of a profound failure of human empathy, I sentence you to live on the streets. A gasp ripped through the courtroom. Thomas's lawyer shot to his feet. Your Honor, you can't do that. That's cruel and unusual. It's not within sentencing guidelines. It is within my power as a magistrate to design creative sentencing for the purpose of rehabilitation and restorative justice, Caprio said, his voice now ironclad. The sentence is this. For the next 30 days, you will surrender your wallet, your phone, your credit cards, your car keys. You will be given a single set of used clothing, a sleeping bag, and a small basic meal stipend. You will live on the streets of this city. You will not check into a hotel. You will not call your father or your friends for rescue. You will be accompanied by a probation officer who will ensure you do not cheat, but they will not protect you from the experience. You will find shelter where you can. You will eat where you can. And for 8 hours each day, you will be partnered with Mr. Leo, who has graciously agreed to this aspect of the sentence. You will follow him. You will help him in his daily struggle. You will listen to him." Thomas's mouth hung open. He looked like a man who had just been pushed off a cliff. The reality of the sentence, the cold, the hunger, the fear, the utter loss of identity, descended on him like a physical weight. He started to shake his head. "No, you can't. My father." "Your father," Caprio interrupted, his tone final, "has been informed, and he has agreed." Those 5 words were the true earthquake. The last pillar of Thomas's world crumbled. His father, the powerful senator, had agreed to this public humiliation, this visceral punishment. The message was clear. Not even that fortress of privilege would protect him from this consequence. Thomas Ellington, for the first time in his life, was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The gavel fell. "Court is adjourned. The sentence begins now. Officers, please escort Mr. Ellington to be processed." As Thomas was led away, his eyes wide with a dawning primal terror. Judge Caprio looked over at Leo. The older man gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of triumph. It was of grim, hopeful acknowledgement. The real trial was just beginning. The first night was a lesson in a particular kind of hell. The processed clothing they gave Thomas was thin, ill-fitting, and carried the faint, sour smell of 1,000 previous owners. The sleeping bag was damp from storage. His probation officer, a stern but not unkind woman named Maria, drove him to a part of the city his Uber rides had never passed through. "This is where Mr. Leo often stays when the shelter is full," she said, parking near an underpass. "Your stipend for food is $5 a day. I'll meet you here at 7 a.m. Mr. Leo will find you." She drove away. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was a roaring vacuum filled with the distant wail of sirens, the rustle of unseen things in the dark, and the oppressive, crushing weight of his own helplessness. He tried to find a spot, his skin crawling. He thought of his king-size bed, his high thread count sheets. A wave of nausea, part fear, part disgust, washed over him. He didn't sleep. He shivered, jumping at every sound, his mind a frantic animal in a cage of its own making. Leo found him at dawn, hunched and hollow-eyed. The older man didn't speak, just handed him a spare granola bar and a bottle of water. "We start walking," Leo said, his voice gravelly but calm. The days blurred into a grueling curriculum of survival. Thomas learned the value of a public bathroom that didn't require a purchase code. He learned the specific, gnawing ache of true hunger, not the casual, "I could eat" of his former life. He learned to scan sidewalks for discarded bottles worth a nickel. The calculus of recycling becoming a vital math. He learned the wary, evasive dance of avoiding police sweeps and the aggression of others who were deeper in their own desperation. But the core of the sentence was his time with Leo. And Leo, true to his nature, didn't lecture. He simply existed and allowed Thomas to witness. He watched Leo spend 30 precious minutes helping an elderly woman with a broken grocery cart, patiently retying it with frayed string. He saw him give his only apple to a shivering teenager huddled in a bus stop. He followed him to the community center, where Leo, in a voice soft but clear, read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to a group of wide-eyed children who clung to him as if he were a rock in a turbulent sea. Thomas saw the way the shelter volunteers greeted Leo by name, with respect, asking after his ribs. He saw a man with nothing, giving everything he had. His time, his patience, his kindness. One afternoon, while trying to find a spot to rest, they were approached by 2 men, aggressive, smelling of cheap liquor. Thomas instinctively stepped back, his old arrogance flaring into fear-fueled contempt. "Get lost," he sneered, the ghost of his old self rising. Leo stepped in front of him. "It's okay, friends," Leo said, his hands open, non-threatening. "We're just moving on. No trouble here." He gently guided Thomas away. When they were at a safe distance, Leo turned to him, his eyes hard. "That pride you still carry? Out here, it's a liability. It'll get you hurt. Or worse. You think you're better than them. You're not. You're just luckier. And right now, you're not even that." The words were a punch to the gut. They stripped away the last vestige of his detached, anthropological view of this experience. He wasn't an observer. He was a participant. And he was failing. The breaking point came on a cold, rainy night, halfway through the sentence. The shelter was full. They were turned away, back into the relentless drizzle. Leo led them to a boarded-up storefront with a shallow overhang. It was already occupied by a woman and a small, coughing child. Without a word, Leo started to turn away to find another spot. "Wait," Thomas heard himself say. The word was rusty, unpracticed in the language of compassion. He looked at the child, her face pale in the gloom. He thought of the dry, if cramped corner of the shelter he'd been denied. He thought of his own warm, forgotten childhood. A dam broke inside him. Not a dramatic shatter, but a slow, painful collapse of a wall he didn't even know he'd built. He walked to the nearby all-night convenience store, the one where the clerk always watched him with suspicious eyes. He spent his last 2 meal stipend dollars, money he'd been hoarding for a hot drink, on a small container of milk and a box of crackers. He walked back, his clothes soaked through, and silently offered them to the mother. She looked at him, then at Leo, then back. She took them, nodding once, her eyes glistening. No words of thanks were exchanged. None were needed. Back under their own meager overhang, shivering violently, Thomas put his head in his hands, and for the first time, he wept. He wept for the pain he'd caused. He wept for Leo's silent dignity. He wept for the mother and the child. He wept for his own former blindness, a blindness that now felt like a moral disease. It wasn't a performance. It was a purge. Leo sat beside him, a solid presence in the dark. He didn't offer empty comfort. He just said quietly, "Now you see." When the 30 days ended, Thomas Ellington was not the same man who had been sentenced. He was thinner, yes, grimmier. But the change was deeper than the surface. It was in his eyes. The arrogant glint was gone, replaced by a weary, sober awareness. The smirk had been etched away by the weather of genuine hardship. They stood once more before Judge Caprio. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Thomas was asked to speak. He turned not to the judge, but to Leo, who stood beside him. His voice, when it came, was low but clear. It carried no trace of his former polished tone. "Mr. Leo, he began, correcting himself. I owe you a debt I can never repay. I attacked you because I was afraid of what you represented. A world I didn't understand, a failure I'd been taught to despise. I threw money at you because I thought it was the only thing that had value." He swallowed hard. "You showed me how wrong I was. You showed me that value is in helping the woman with the cart, in reading to a child, in sharing your last bit of food, in showing kindness when the world gives you none. You have more honor in your little finger than I had in my entire body. I am sorry. From the bottom of my soul, I am sorry." He then turned to Judge Caprio. "Your Honor, thank you for your sentence. It was the hardest and most important thing anyone has ever done for me. You didn't punish me. You woke me up." Caprio nodded, a deep satisfaction in his eyes, not of vengeance, but of a gardener seeing a barren field finally begin to sprout. "The court sentence is complete. However, Mr. Ellington, justice is a journey, not a destination. I strongly encourage you to continue that journey." 6 months later. The camera would show a different scene, a community kitchen, bustling with activity. Thomas Ellington, in jeans and a simple t-shirt, is ladling soup onto trays, laughing easily with the volunteers. He is not a figurehead. He is a worker. He helped establish a foundation, funded not just by his family's money, but by his relentless fundraising that connects vacant city-owned properties with NGOs to create temporary, dignified housing. He works with Leo, who now sits on the foundation's board, his insight and wisdom guiding their efforts. The two men are not friends in a conventional sense. Theirs is a bond forged in the fire of painful truth, a relationship of profound mutual respect. The final shot would hold on Judge Frank Caprio, sitting at his bench, addressing not the courtroom, but the camera, the millions watching this story unfold. "We all make mistakes," he says, his voice gentle but firm. "The measure of a person is not in never falling, but in how they get up and what they do to make amends." True justice isn't about making someone suffer. It's about making them see. It's about restoring what was broken in the victim and in the soul of the one who caused the harm. Accountability is not the enemy of love. It is its toughest expression. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is hold up an unflinching mirror and say, "Look, see what you have done, and now choose to be better." He allows a small, wise smile to touch his lips. The law is about rules, but humanity is about grace. And grace, my friends, is always earned in the hard, humble work of understanding another person's walk in this world. Remember that. The screen fades to black, leaving the audience with a feeling not of schadenfreude, but of catharsis. Justice was served, not with a hammer, but with a mirror and a guide. A heart was changed. A lesson was learned. That character is built in the crucible of consequence, and that real love demands we become better than we were. Subscribe for more stories that don't just tell you about justice, but show you its transformative power. Share this story if it moved you. Like if you believe in second chances earned, not given. Because everyone from the streets to the Senate has a journey to walk. Let's walk it with our eyes open.
We continue to remember America's nicest judge, Frank Caprio.
Frank Caprio.
Frank Caprio.
Frank Caprio, known to a lot of folks as the nicest judge in the world.